Thanks for staying with us on No Apologies. I am Lori Hins, your host, and with me from North Dakota, but remotely on the eastern part of the state, he is, are you from Castleton, I think? Kirk Rosin, my friend Kirk Rosin is here. Thank you so much for being on the show, Kirk.
Yeah,
my
pleasure.
We're going to talk tonight about a trip that you took recently, but it was brought on by the Orphan grain train. People may be familiar with that. I was in Jamestown not long ago, and they had a whole setup there in Jamestown for the Orphan grain train. Let's talk about that.
Yes, Orphan Grain Train is a Christian humanitarian aid organization, operates around the United States. The home office is in Norfolk, Nebraska, and here in North Dakota, we have an office in Jamestown.
Well, you are involved with that, and you probably wanted to see where, I'm guessing, you just wanted to see where things were going, and you knew that you were collecting things for the Ukraine. So some people followed the money, you followed the Orphan grain train, as I understand it.
That's correct. There was a response to a huge outpouring of response to a request for supplies and materials for the refugees in Ukraine, and I became a strong part of that here in the Fargo area and actually all across the state of North Dakota. But I've been around the world and in a number of places, and I wanted to make sure that the supplies were all going to the people that needed to get them, that they weren't ending up in the black market or being sold off someplace. And so I decided to go to Ukraine and check for myself, just to vet what the organization was doing and to make sure the people's donations were going to the right place and where they should go.
That is a marvelous thing to do, Kirk. That is just a great thing. And you were kind enough to give us pictures. And now, when did you take this trip?
These pictures were in the end of April when we were over in Ukraine. This is Orphan grain train supplies in a warehouse in Ternopil, Ukraine. They had arrived on Monday. We were there on Wednesday, and they expected all these supplies to be out by Friday.
Wow, amazing. Moving on, there's another picture here. Here's you just looking at some other volunteers, it looks like.
Yes, this is in Ternopil, and this is actually in a church. There were 1,100 churches in Ternopil, and a fellow there, a couple of days before the war had started, had contacted all the churches and said, we need to get together and prepare for this. And they had a meeting in 4 days, and the churches handled everything. This is another church where food is being prepared at. These 1,100 churches took in 40,000 refugees in a week.
My, oh my,
the government
wow.
was not taking care of these people. The churches were. This here is in a refugee center in Chernivtsi, Ukraine. And we stayed there for 2 days, and we stayed with the refugees. And this is the sleeping arrangements, the housing arrangements. There were 8 of us in this room. There were 22 of us that used one bathroom and one shower, and there were no complaints.
That is amazing. The conditions there for the refugees are really interesting, but this speaks volumes, this next picture.
This is a van which was there in Chernovich. It had brought materials and people from Mariupol, and you can see where the shrapnel had shredded the side of it, broken out most of the windows. I do not know the driver of this vehicle, how he came out of this, but I do know the owner of this business. He and 3 other businessmen, the 4 of them, were going into Mariupol to organize to get refugees out of the city. Their car was hit by a rocket, and all 4 of them were killed.
My, oh my goodness, that's amazing. This looks like a church.
This is a church. This is in Chernovich, and this is where the refugee center was staying at. They had about 100 refugees, and this is where we stayed for 2 days. And this again is another picture. The other side of the room, these are some of the refugees. This is a family, a couple with their son. They were out of Kiev. They'd been there about 2 months.
My goodness gracious. All right, moving on here. We've got a couple more here.
Yeah, this was a little girl here from Michigan had sent a letter to a Ukrainian refugee, and this was the little girl we gave it to. This is these are all refugees in this picture, and this was the cafeteria where they were eating at, which used to be a nursery.
Now, speaking of eating, this next one shows a really interesting picture here. This looks
This is
like lunch.
this is a meal. This
Mhm.
is what the refugees were eating. All the food is donated. Everything comes in, and this is what they had. They had soup, a little corn kind of made into a custard mesh. You can see there were some apples and some cookies and some bread. And so the people were not starving, but I didn't see any overweight people there.
Well, and it doesn't look like a whole lot of protein in there either for them. And this final
Exactly.
picture, right? So that's really hard when you're not getting protein. This looks really tight.
This is an orphanage. These are kids from an orphanage. This orphanage was halfway between Kiev and Belarus, and it was an orphanage. The head of this orphanage showed me the pictures of just explosions going on all night long. And after 2 days of shelling and bombing, she said the children, which have mental and physical um, problems,
Trauma? We got
were
trauma?
yes, we're just well, not from the trauma, before
Hmm.
the trauma,
Sure.
and this was just causing all kinds of problems. She felt she just had to get them out of there. So there were about 13 of them in this room, and they they had come here. They've been here for about 2 months.
Wow. These are amazing photos, and I'm so grateful to you. We've got about 30 seconds left, so you can tell people a little bit at the last bit here about the Orphan Grain Train.
The Orphan Grain Train, as I said, is just a volunteer organization that is Christian and sends aid not only around the world but to all across the United States when there's hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever the case might be. And they had airlifted these supplies in there to get them in there because we had contacts there because we'd been sending aid to these countries for 10, 12 years. So we sent
Well,
aid to Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Poland, wherever the refugees were ending up in.
Kirk Rosin, thank you very much for being on the program. We appreciate it, and we found out that the Orphan Grain Train things are going to where they belong. Thank you so much for being on the program.